Hello and welcome to this episode of The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan reporting from Beijing Capital International Airport. Now, there have been mixed reactions to China's lifting of its quarantine and travel restrictions. Apparently, some countries welcome Chinese travelers with open arms. Thailand even sent one of its deputy prime ministers to Bangkok's main international airport to welcome the first group of Chinese travelers. Thank you, Thailand. On the other hand, some countries put on some very stringent requirements asking Chinese arrivals, China-originated travelers to put on a band showing that they are coming from China. Apparently, those were not the friendliest of policies, but regardless, just look around me. There have been an increase, a surge of Chinese travelers going overseas. And for those who have arrived in China, they're breathing a huge sigh of relief now that they don't have to go through quarantine.
I'm traveling back from Latvia.
I came back to Beijing from Boston via Tokyo and Hong Kong. The journey took me 2 days.
I went to the UK for Christmas and then come back to Beijing through Hong Kong.
And we are living now since 1.5 years in Beijing. And we were in Germany just for Christmas holiday. And now we are coming back again.
I came back to Beijing from Melbourne via Hong Kong. We thought there would be a quarantine and we considered it in our travel plan, but China lifted quarantine by January 8th. We finished all entering procedures in just a couple of minutes.
I'm looking forward just going out in the city without quarantine.
It's much more convenient now, so yeah, we're really happy now that we do not have these restrictions anymore.
I really support this decision. Our lives have been quite affected in the last 3 years. I think China really cares about its people to make such a decision now.
Yeah, I think China will play absolutely a critical role, the second biggest economy in the world. So I hope through 23, China's role the right place in the world as the second biggest economy and play that big role to bring the whole world back. It will be very welcome for us as a family and also I think for many people in China and the rest of the world. So. Oh, it will affect me a lot because I work in tourism industry, so these 3 years were really hard for us, so now it will be much easier to organize conferences, the things we do, and yeah, I'm looking forward to that,
Let's not forget, in the past 3 years, it was tough times for the executors of China's quarantine requirements. For example, China's immigration officers at major ports of entry. They have to endure high risk of infection, long working hours, and separation with their kids and loved ones. Meet Tang Hao. He's an immigration inspection officer at Beijing Capital International Airport. In the past 3 years, he has provided assistance to international travelers and helped facilitate their immigration procedures. He's also a father of 2. Working long hours in a potentially dangerous environment has been a routine for the past 3 years. So Officer Tang, it's great to have you with us. First of all, can you tell us a bit about your work? Of course, you're affiliated with the National Immigration Inspection Administration, Beijing Bureau.
In the past 3 years, all inbound travelers had to be checked at Beijing Capital International Airport's T3D. So, as officers at Beijing General Station of Immigration Inspection, we were responsible for the inspection of all inbound travelers in Beijing to China.
So Officer Tang, when you talk about China's immigration policies, a lot of people associate that with very strict quarantine measures. What kind of challenges does it add to your work?
We were doing more than inbound checks in the past 3 years. Preventing COVID from entering China became our new priority. Immigration inspection officers like us had to wear PPEs for inbound inspections such as gloves, goggles, and other equipment just like all medical workers did. We were providing the highest level of protection to our officers. It was equipped with the best protective gear that all officers could inspect all inbound travelers.
But you will have to abide by China's quarantine measures as well, right? If you meet with people coming from what was used to be high-risk areas, you have to go through quarantine for up to 2 weeks. And during that time, you will not be able to meet your kids and family.
At the very beginning, there was a lot of pressure. First, we didn't have enough information about COVID. Second, we are not medical professionals. We had a lot to learn. That's why it was so stressful. And also, as immigration inspection officers, we had close contact with inbound travelers who were potentially infected. So, we were facing higher risks during the pandemic. In order to remain operational, we had to work for a certain period of time and then stay in quarantine before going back to work. We were not able to meet our family and anyone outside during closed-loop management. We couldn't even meet our colleagues when staying in quarantine. And we have many young officers who may have little kids and old people to look after. For those couples, both working in our system, when one was quarantined at home, he or she couldn't see their family, even at home. Especially during the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, there was a lot more pressure on border entry. We needed more staff on duty. For most of us at that time, it was like continuous duty and subsequent quarantine. So we would spend at least 1/3 of the time in isolation every year, during which we couldn't see our family.
It was very tough 3 years. What kept you going?
As an immigration inspection officer, professionalism has been supporting us all along. We need to nurture a spirit of devotion. In the face of difficulties, everyone has been striving forward despite all the hardships. At the very beginning, when the special zone was established, we did not know about the disease, and we had to wear PPEs for 7 or even 8 hours. The pressure due to inbound travelers was massive back then, because the flights had not been reduced, and we had full flights heading back. Our border entries were under great pressure, and during Beijing Winter Olympics, we needed more officers than ever. When there are COVID-positive people entering, we needed to move them to another place, which would for sure cause direct exposure and contact. So it all depended on everyone in our team to face the difficulties and strive forward.
Of course, with China optimizing its quarantine and travel requirements since January the 8th, 2023, what changes does that bring to your line of work?
I think things changed in two different ways. On the one hand, there are more flights and more passengers coming in, so the expression on their faces has changed. Before, we were wearing protective suits to carry out inspections. The way they looked at us and the attitude were generally cautious. The fact that we were wearing PPEs created distance, but people's fear of being infected also increased the distance. Now we can see overseas Chinese who have not returned home for 3 years. They cry with joy when meeting with their families. We also see business people who often travel. They do not need to stay in quarantine anymore. It's convenient to do business now, and they give us the thumbs up. On the other hand, life has also changed. Although the virus is still there, we now have a better understanding of it, and the change of our policy has brought us closer to each other emotionally. I feel really happy about it.
So having been an immigration officer for, 15 years now, can you perhaps share with us some of the more memorable stories of yours?
There are actually too many things that left an impression on me. Now, as I recall, the first thing is when I started this job in 2008, and that was during Beijing Olympics. For me, I had just joined the force at that time. It was quite mind-blowing to see athletes and tourists all over the world coming to China. The 2008 Olympic Games had won applause and recognition of the whole world, and it was a great opportunity for people all over the world to know about us and China. I could actually feel both outbound and inbound passengers praising China at that time. I was so proud of it and proud of my country. And the second thing I want to share is the evacuation of overseas Chinese from Libya in 2011. My colleagues were on a chartered plane to Libya to pick up overseas Chinese. Back then, we were responsible for entry procedures for the chartered plane in Beijing. The most impressive moments for me are when we went through the formalities for these overseas Chinese. We welcomed each and every one of them, saying, "Welcome home." Many of them were Chinese employees stationed overseas, and some were Chinese workers who were really tough, working abroad for years. When we told them that our country would take them home, we saw tears of gratitude in their eyes. That was really impressive. I almost cried at that time, and I learned that our country will always get our back. The third story is about our work during the pandemic. In the past 3 years, I was so impressed by our team spirit because every one of us was so dedicated to their work. No one flinched at the most difficult time. And these are the 3 stories that I want to share.
Now for some international response to China's new travel policies, let's talk to a panel of experts. Now for more discussions, I'm joined today in College Park, Maryland, the United States, by Martin Dresner, Professor and Chair of the Logistics, Business and Public Policy Department of the R.H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. Both in Hong Kong SAR, we have Xiaowen, Vice President at the Air Transport Research Society. And we also have in Hong Kong, China, Achim Czerny, Associate Professor of the Department of Logistics and Maritime Studies at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Welcome to the Hub on CGTN, gentlemen. Achim, why don't I start with you? You're an aviation expert. Let me ask you this. How soon do you expect air travel, both to China and from China to the outside world, to return to normal? Because there are so many forces at play. There's a lagging effect, but also there's pent-up demand for Chinese to go outside and vice versa.
So what we see worldwide, actually, globally, the scheduled airline capacity is relatively close to where we were in 2019. This is pre-pandemic. Some countries, like China, is a little bit behind, and some other countries are closer to where they were pre-pandemic. Altogether, I feel like a lot of people, they want to travel, and as soon as they can travel, they do it. And yeah, so this is... So I think, there's a common wisdom, so to say, that by maybe 24, even 25, sort of we will be back where we were in 2019.
Okay, great. Xiaowen, let me go to you. You live in Hong Kong, China. A lot of northern-bound travelers, Hong Kong residents going north to the Chinese mainland. There's a quota right now in place, meaning 60,000 travelers are allowed to go to the north, to the mainland China these days. But how do you feel about all these changes? And finally, we have Hong Guan, right, after 3 long years.
Yeah, I think everybody is very pleased about the move after so long. Finally, I think that we can move almost freely between Hong Kong and mainland. And this is the good news to families and also to business. As far as I know, soon after the opening, many of the quota in some of the busy days has been taken. So we are extremely pleased, and we hope it could be even more convenient in the days to come.
Yeah, that's the hope. Dresner, in the United States, how do you expect traveling to and from China to return to what it was before COVID? Based on your own country experience, I guess it's not totally comparable, China and the United States, but what is your best guess?
I checked the numbers, and our domestic employments travel in the United States is pretty close to almost at 2019 levels. And so the recovery here in the U.S. has been pretty well complete. Now, we still are short on some international routes, especially to China. And I know that the U.S. airlines, and I'm sure the Chinese airlines, are very anxious to restart a lot of those routes and to get traffic back to 2019 levels very soon.
So Achim, which countries or regions do you expect to benefit more from China's move, meaning lifting its travel and quarantine restrictions?
Well, what we think is that those countries where the Chinese are like to go for leisure travel will be benefiting very much, like Singapore, Thailand, and so on.
But talking about Europe, it's also a hot spot for tourists, right? If you think about Greece, Italy, even Montenegro, Serbia, where I went to recently. But on one hand, you have the European Union being very wary and cautious about unconditionally welcoming Chinese travelers. They said Chinese travelers must go through COVID testing. But on the other hand, the tourism industry and the aviation sectors of Europe are rubbing their hands to welcome Chinese travelers. How do you see these different dynamics playing out in the weeks and months ahead?
Yeah, policies can change like any time, and hopefully there will be it's like free travel without any testing in the future. I can say I was just flying from Germany into Hong Kong, and it was like in the old days, and it was a big relief. I can say I really think this is important, and of course, airlines, the tourism industry, businesses. They're hoping for like free traveling among countries.
And then how do you see the lift of quarantine and travel restrictions impacting China-US relations, which haven't seen nearly as much people-to-people exchange as they should have since the trade war in 2017, 2018, and then COVID?
Certainly, there's a lot of people who would like the movement of people to go back to pre-2019 types of levels. I work at a university, and we really missed our Chinese students. So we
There's
would
a big Chinese diaspora in the University of Maryland. I went there briefly for an accent reduction program in 2011, I guess, 2012. Beautiful campus.
Yeah, we would love to have our Chinese students back. We need them, actually. And certainly from an academic point of view, I can't wait to get back to mainland China to visit all my friends there.
What do you think the Chinese students have brought to the classrooms, at least from the courses that you have taught them?
They're fabulous students. We love them. They bring a level of rigor. They bring a different perspective. So they mix well with our American students and students from other foreign countries. So they're a terrific asset to U.S. universities.
Xiaowen, we see countries and regions having very different attitudes towards Chinese travelers. Some Southeast Asian countries, such as Thailand, having their sports minister, tourism minister, and the deputy prime minister, I guess, welcoming the Chinese travelers, the first bunch of them since COVID, at Bangkok's International Airport. And compare that against the restrictions placed by countries like South Korea. How do you think these Southeast Asian countries, such as Thailand, are able to attract more Chinese tourists?
Well, I think they are doing the right job because now during the pandemic, many industries, especially aviation and transport, logistics, are really badly hit, and so they really need to pick up and grow, taking advantage of the post-pandemic season. So I think they are doing their job and they are doing the right thing. And this is actually, of course, because of the last 3 years, some of the capacity has been lost. Some of the airline have been downsizing. Some of the airport, their traffic volume has been down. So they need a little bit time to get back all the capacity. But most importantly is the demand. If the demand is there, it will going to drive the recovery. So once we liberalize the travel and there's a higher demand, that eventually going to boost up everything. I think this is a good start.
And then I've got to ask you this, as a Hong Kong resident, as Chinese, how do you feel when you see the images of Chinese travelers being forced to wear a band saying that I'm Chinese, as a yellow band, a yellow board placed, right next to their chest, at the customs, as if they're paraded through the customs. these Chinese travelers stand out. How do you feel about them? This humiliation, or is this simply quid pro quo if you think about what Beijing did to international travelers inbound? Or do you think these countries like South Korea are shooting themselves in the foot?
Well, I think it's more, instead of looking like a smart move, it's more like something, a decision made out of panic. I think the people are probably very concerned when they look at some of the numbers. They get very worried and concerned, and they do these things, which may not be smart. Now, I think the problem is we have gone through the pandemic for 3 years. We should have learned a lot. So our decision rules, our decisions should be based on some clear and transparent rules or guidance or some data, instead of a panic. And also at a time when we really want the tourism to recover, we really want people to travel more. This is the time to really make people more comfortable about traveling, make it more convenient for people to travel. We understand, well, there may be a panic, but hopefully, as this time goes by, people really can come back to the basics. What should be the right decision rule? What can we do to make things smoother, make people travel happier and more convenient?
Yeah, what we need is facts, not fear. Martin, how do you see China's lifting of travel restrictions affecting the recovery of the global economy?
Yeah, well, certainly this is an issue that we have discussed, and one of the problems during the pandemic, when there was a lot of restrictions on air travel, was that air cargo couldn't be transported very easily from one place to another on international routes, just because of the lack of capacity in the bellies of aircraft. So if we get a resumption of routes to the levels that we had prior to the COVID pandemic, then I think that that's going to bode well for all the trade that moves quickly in aircraft, the air freight that time sensitive type of trade will go back to normal levels.
Achim, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. I think something that maybe many of the listeners will not necessarily know is that really the majority of the air cargo is actually not carried by freighter aircraft, but really in the belly of the passenger aircraft. So Hong Kong was and is, again, the #1 cargo airport in the world. Then passenger demand dropped, and passenger aircraft also, there were very few aircraft. And then this also had a strong effect on the air cargo traffic at Hong Kong International Airport. Why? Because a large share of the air cargo is carried by passenger aircraft. And then, of course, some airlines, they use the passenger aircraft and they turned them into so-called freighter, not freighter, but freighter. But that was only doing part of the job. So overall, the air cargo demand, although Hong Kong is so strong, was still lower than what there was pre-pandemic. Although there was such a strong demand for air cargo, and that really had to do with the lack of passenger aircraft. So there's a strong relationship here. And now with the recovery of passenger demand, this definitely helps also air cargo businesses.
Wow. Thanks for enlightening me and our audience, I suppose. Xiaowen, how do you expect the reopening of China to impact the world economy?
Well, I think the news about the world economy is really mixed. I think for many, many reasons. The oil price, economy, strong currency exchange. But this is a time, really, we need drivers. We need some boost. And I think the opening up of the Chinese aviation market really going to help the global economy, especially sectors such as tourism, such as logistics, trade, and definitely it's going to be a positive factor.
But so far, there are fears about the reopening of China and rising Chinese demand to push up commodity prices, to push up oil prices. What would be some of your concerns?
Well, I think the problem, as I mentioned, is when this is a time we really need to work together to help the economy, to promote trade, to promote communications. Now, I understand there may be some concern, but after so long, we should really learn from what we have seen and do in the last 3 years. So we need some transparent and clear decision rule, and people can discuss. We want to understand what the decision have been made, how they were made, and what are the facts and the information they are based on. And then I think make it clear and transparent, and then we can really help the economy, help the people's communication together.
Yeah, Martin, you study the intersection of business and public policy. I guess the reopening of China is a case in point where a political decision, a policy decision can go a long way in impacting the business world, not just in China, the United States, but the rest of the world.
Yeah, of course. Politicians make political decisions, and we're hoping that the political decisions they make are going to be favorable for promoting trade.
Yeah, Xiaowen, talking about mainland and Hong Kong, the Greater Bay Area has been a much talked about concept. It's written in the Chinese Constitution as well as key policy documents. It's made a priority for China. And then with the Tongguan, the reopening of mainland borders to Hong Kong residents, how do you expect the Greater Bay Area to gain momentum from here?
Well, I think it's a good news, and it's almost a must to make it very, very convenient for people to travel and meet each other and collaborate. Now, if you look at the Greater Bay Area, different region cities play different roles. Hong Kong has been very strong in finance, in basic fundamental research. I think we are probably one of the cities that have 5 of the top 100 universities. So we are very, very strong in fundamental research. On the other hand, if you look at Shenzhen, for example, they have a very vibrant high-tech R&D.
Yeah.
And then if you look at Guangzhou and also that whole area, very good in manufacturing. And if you want to develop a new product, if you do the prototype in Hong Kong, it's going to be expensive. It's going to take much longer rather than get it done, for example, in Shenzhen and Dongguan. So really, the region have a lot of synergies and to cooperate. Now, how do you realize that synergy? You need people to freely travel, to meet each other, work seamlessly together. So I think the Tongguan or the liberalization of the travel is a must in the short term and also in the long term for the region to really realize the synergy.
All right, Xiaowen, Martin, and Achim, thank you all, gentlemen. Thank you for being part of this discussion, and thank you for coming to the Hub on CGTN.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
My pleasure.
That will do it for this edition of the Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan at Beijing Capital International Airport. I'll see you again next time.